This is NBC Nightly News, Thursday, July 31st, with John Chancellor reporting from the NBC News Center in New York.
Good evening. In Helsinki today, President Ford made another attempt to get Prime Minister Demirel of Turkey to change his mind about the issue of the American bases in Turkey, now under Turkish control. President Ford did not succeed. Tom Brokaw has the story.
During a morning meeting, President Ford, as he has before, offered Turkey a $50 million weapons grant, but Prime Minister Demirel turned him down, explaining that his country wants to restore its right to buy weapons. After the meeting, the Prime Minister was vague about the future of American bases in his country.
For the time being, we have stopped the activities, as you know.
What are the possibilities of starting them again?
We will see it.
What does it depend upon?
Well, I cannot tell you right now.
President Ford believes nothing more will be done to American bases in Turkey until Congress decides what to do about the arms embargo. Meanwhile, the Ford administration is enlisting European allies, such as British Prime Minister Wilson, to help solve a fundamental part of the Turkish problem, the Cyprus situation. Cyprus was discussed at length during a luncheon meeting between President Ford and his British, West German, and French counterparts. Kissinger called Cyprus a disaster for the Western alliance. At a later news conference, the Secretary suggested Congress could help solve Cyprus by lifting the arms embargo, but insisted he's not blaming Congress.
I hope we will not reach the point where various parts of the American government, the executive or the legislative, go around to foreign governments to line up support against other branches of the government. And this is not the policy of the President, nor the policy of any other member of the administration.
President Ford is expected to continue working on the Turkish problem, but he has other items on his agenda for tomorrow. He's scheduled to address the Helsinki conference. Secretary Kissinger said Mr. Ford's speech will be a description of the Americans' attitude toward détente. Tom Brokaw, NBC News, with the president in Helsinki.
Meanwhile, in Washington, White House lobbyists worked through the day and into the night trying to get congressional leaders to agree on some kind of compromise on the issue of military aid to Turkey. And they also kept in touch with the presidential party in Helsinki. At the European Security Conference today, the Soviet Communist leader Leonid Brezhnev delivered a warning and proposed a new step for the future. John Dancy has that story.
In his speech to the Security Conference, Party Secretary Brezhnev said the next step in détente should be a reduction of arms in Central Europe without reducing security. But he warned that the whole process of détente could be endangered if nations interfered in each other's internal affairs.
No one should try to dictate to other peoples on the basis of foreign policy considerations of one kind or another the manner in which they ought to manage their internal affairs. It is only the people of each given state and no one else that has the sovereign right to resolve its internal affairs and establish its internal laws. A different approach would be a flimsy and perilous one, and would give ground for the cause of would be perilous as a ground for international cooperation.
The major Western nations called Brezhnev's speech conciliatory and balanced, but Secretary of State Kissinger admitted that Mr. Brezhnev's remarks about non-interference could be interpreted to mean that the Soviet Union has no intention of observing the agreement on a freer flow of ideas and people across national borders. John Dancy, NBC News, Helsinki.
This also from Secretary Kissinger on Israel. Should the United Nations vote to expel Israel, the United States will take definite and clear action, but Kissinger didn't specify what that action would be. The Boston Globe reported today that Israel has at least 10 nuclear bombs. In Washington, a former Defense Intelligence Agency expert said Israel definitely has nuclear bombs, although he wasn't sure of the number. In Jerusalem, the Israeli foreign minister dismissed the reports as purely speculative. Also on the program tonight, Congress refused to accept President Ford's compromise on oil price control, passing a bill the president says he will veto, and that could mean higher prices in September. James Hoffa, former president of the Teamsters Union, is missing, and we'll hear some of the latest interview he has given. We'll also have another special report on cancer, this one on cancer care. Those and other stories in a minute. The Congress today turned down President Ford's plan for a 39-month decontrol of prices of domestic oil. Instead, the House followed the Senate in voting a simple 6-month extension of controls after the end of this month. From Helsinki, the president had his press secretary say that the president will veto the bill and thereby end all controls if the Congress doesn't override the veto. Irving R. Levine reports on the possible consequences.
At the White House, President Ford's intended veto was explained by Frank Zarb, the top energy official, as aimed at encouraging less use and more production of oil.
The need is to develop more American oil, and that's part of the program to bring on additional domestic production to displace imported oil, in addition to the conservation aspects of a decontrol program would provide. And President Ford had originally wanted that done gradually, but the Congress did not permit that to occur.
Expiration of price controls will enable producers to charge anything the market will bear for oil from older wells, until now frozen at less than half the price of other oil. This means a price increase of about 7 cents a gallon within several months, raising gas prices to as much as 70 cents a gallon. But administration sources say President Ford doesn't intend to let gasoline prices go up that much because it could hurt his election chances. Instead, the president plans to remove the $2 tariff he imposed on each barrel of foreign oil. That tariff drove up gasoline prices about 5 cents a gallon. So, removal of the tariff would mean that motorists would end up paying only an additional 2 or 3 cents a gallon when price controls run out. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, at the White House.
The Agriculture Department said today that in the month ending on the 15th of July, the prices farmers got for what they raised went up 3%. Only the price of cattle went down. This price rise occurred in the month of the big grain sales to the Soviet Union, but the department did not mention that. New York City took some very drastic actions today to restore the city's credit and to avoid defaulting on its debts. Richard Hunt has the story.
New York, once the richest city in the country, has a huge financial problem. How to repay or refinance more than $6 billion in debts over the next year. The city has been spending beyond its means for so long that the people who lend it money by buying its notes and bonds are dubious about the city's ability to pay. So today, Mayor Beam was forced to announce a sweeping program of economy for the city's great bureaucracy. The mayor said he would freeze wages of city employees at the level of July 1st, thus depriving 300,000 workers of raises, either promised or sought.
Sell out my membership with my...
Some of the major unions agreed, but the policemen, firemen, and teachers all said no.
I don't like the deal as it stands. I think that we have to be treated in police and fire the same as everybody else. And until we get that kind of a treatment, and as far as we're concerned, we cannot participate.
The mayor also said bus and subway fares, which have been subsidized by the city for years, would be increased from 35 cents to 50 cents a ride. The mayor also said he would cut the city's support for the city university by $32 million a year. The university has been tuition-free, but now the students will have to pay, either tuition or higher fees. Beam announced his economies with an appeal for confidence in the city's stability.
To the financial community, to the state, and to the federal government, I say, your readiness to invest now in the future of the city will determine how well and how fast New York recovers its momentum. The commitment is ours. The decision now is yours.
Budget cuts are being made to improve the city's credit rating, but it will be up to the people who are being asked to lend the city money to decide whether Mayor Beam's program makes them feel they're likely to get that money back. Richard Hunt, NBC News, New York.
Another death today in the aftermath of the violence in Detroit on Monday night. A Polish immigrant dragged from his car died in a hospital. On Monday night, a white bar owner shot and killed a black teenager, saying the young man was trying to break into his car. That was followed by some violence and vandalism, and the immigrant was fatally injured in the violence. James Hoffa is missing. The family of the former Teamsters Union president and ex-convict reported Hoffa missing early today. His car was found outside a restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, not far from where the family lives. The police were asked whether they thought Hoffa had been kidnapped. Their answer was, well, his car was there and he was not. In Detroit, a Teamster Union official talked about what he knew of Hoffa's being missing.
Well, of course, I've been notified, like you have, that he evidently went to lunch yesterday, and after lunch he called either his home or an associate, I'm not sure which, and said that whoever he was supposed to meet with had not showed up for lunch and that he was coming home or going to see his associate. I'm not sure which way that went. And they evidently found his car, and they haven't found Mr. Hoffa since.
Hoffa, who spent more than 4 years in jail for jury tampering and mail fraud, has been trying to regain presidency of the union from Frank Fitzsimmons, who succeeded him. 3 weeks ago, a car owned by Fitzsimmons' son, who is vice president of Hoffa's old Detroit Teamsters local, was blown up. Young Fitzsimmons was not hurt. And Hoffa, in his most recent interview, decried that violence that has beset the local. Here is some of what Hoffa said in an interview with WWJ Detroit.
The bombing is one of a long line of incidents that's happened the last 3 years concerning violence in 299 officials. There has been rumors that there is an individual who is doing this bombing. His name I will not talk about since he's not been arrested, but who's a mental incompetent, a drunk. And I know that the FBI has been around asking questions concerning that individual. Whether or not they decide he's the one or not will be their determination, not mine. But almost everybody in the local union has that man's name on the tip of their tongue when they think about violence.
Are you absolutely certain that no one within 299 had anything to do with that car bombing?
I would bet my life on it.
That was James Hoffa 2 weeks ago in an interview. After a 5-month delay and with a new chairman, the House committee investigating the CIA held its first open hearing today. It heard the Comptroller General of the United States admit he doesn't know how much the CIA spends or how it spends it. But the chairman of the committee says he knows but won't make the information public on his own. Ford Rowan tells us how that came about.
The new chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Otis Pike, pledged to find out how much and in what way the CIA and other intelligence agencies spend their money. Comptroller General Elmer Statz said there has been no outside audit of the CIA in 13 years.
Does the General Accounting Office know how much we spend on intelligence?
No, sir, we do not. And as I've indicated in my statement, in preparing the report for the Senate Government Operations Committee, we were not able to obtain that information specifically.
But what Pike did not tell the others on the committee is that he already knows the secret budget figures. Pike told reporters afterwards that he had been told the figures, but he would not release them on his own. He acknowledged that he's made arrangements with the CIA so that information can be given to him personally, not to him in his role as chairman, so that he won't have to share the information with others on the committee. He said he and the intelligence agency have decided jointly which secrets will be kept secret. Pike replaced Lucian Nedzi, who was pressured to give up the chairmanship because Nedzi withheld information about CIA activities from his colleagues under a similar arrangement with the CIA. Ford Rowan, NBC News, Washington.
We have another special report on cancer tonight. This time, Bob Jameson looks at the quality of treatment and care that cancer patients can expect, both in community hospitals and in hospitals specializing in cancer.
They are receiving the best treatment for their disease that they can possibly get. They are patients at St. Jude's Hospital, where much of today's accepted treatment for leukemia was pioneered. At least half of these youngsters will survive the disease. But not all children in the United States who have leukemia are as fortunate. Some doctors believe only 40% of leukemic children are receiving the proper treatment. Doctors don't like to talk about it, but nevertheless, it is true. There is not one uniformly excellent level of cancer care in the United States. The best cancer care in the world is available in this country if the patient is fortunate enough to go to the right place.
Now, the results are better in those patients that are treated here entirely.
Jill Canvas came to the right place. She has choriocarcinoma, a rare form of cancer that occurs in pregnant women. A form of cancer few physicians ever see. But this doctor at Northwestern Hospital in Chicago sees 25 new cases of choriocarcinoma each month. And that experience has led to a high cure rate. The problem of cancer is twofold. Not every physician knows how to treat cancer, and not every hospital can support that care. Care is good at Northwestern and at the nation's other comprehensive cancer centers because doctors there are specialists and familiar with the latest treatments. And because the centers have the expensive, sophisticated equipment needed to support cancer care. But the comprehensive centers, located generally in the big cities, can't handle every person who has cancer. Officials of MD Anderson Hospital in Houston say they can't even handle everyone in Texas who has cancer. One answer is to raise the level of care in community hospitals, but the complexity of cancer treatment makes that difficult.
Whenever our treatments are complicated and require a very high technology, distribution, even distribution of those treatments is going to be very, very difficult. Now, we've got to work toward getting those as fairly and equally distributed as we possibly can. But it's a very tough job whenever that's the case.
Preoperative evaluation has become more and more important.
As big a job as improving care in hospitals that don't specialize in cancer care is continuing education for doctors. These medical students at the University of Texas are learning treatments that are much different than even their instructors learned in medical school. And after these students begin practice, treatments and techniques will continually change, and a doctor's time for continuing education may be scarce. And the level of continuing education for doctors, like cancer care itself, varies. Dr. Charles Edwards, former Assistant HEW Secretary.
Certain states have a better system of continuing medical education for their physicians than others, and as a result of which I think we see this tremendous variation in quality and the kinds of care that are being given to cancer patients. I think it's beginning to become a little bit more equal, but it's a long way from being where it ought to be.
The National Cancer Institute, by developing a system of regional cancer centers at private institutions, is hoping to raise the level of cancer care. But even with the regional centers, care still varies today in the United States, from one hospital to another and one city to another. And there are no signs the medical community is going to take the dramatic steps necessary to change that. So unless the cancer patient is fortunate enough to get his care at one of the country's major comprehensive centers, his chances for survival will be diminished. Bob Jamison, NBC News, Chicago.
In Los Angeles today, researchers at the University of California said they found new hope for victims of leukemia and other forms of cancer in a process that involves heavy bombardments of radiation and transfers of bone marrow. Bob Jamison and NBC News will have more on that story later. Alger Hiss, who spent almost 4 years in jail for perjury in the famous Pumpkin Papers case, got the evidence back today from the government, which declassified it. Hiss was accused by the late Whittaker Chambers of turning over military secrets to the Russians. The original accusations came from the House Un-American Activities Committee, of which Richard Nixon was a highly vocal member. But today, Hiss told reporters there was nothing in the material that could be used for espionage or anything else of a clandestine nature. Charles Lockwood, who's an executive with a British firm in Argentina, was kidnapped today by a guerrilla band that wounded his chauffeur and 2 bodyguards. It is Lockwood's second kidnapping in 2 years, and the last time his firm paid $2 million in ransom. The Apollo astronauts, now out of the hospital, will stay in Hawaii another 10 days to rest and to continue daily medical tests. Their wives and children joined them there last night. It was quite a scene.
Hi. Well, how you doing? golly, you guys made it, huh?
Glad to see you.
Thank you very well. You got out real fast, huh?
Good. How are you? You just look great.
I brought you clean underwear.
Actually, about all you need around here is a swimming suit.
You mean I can take it all home with you?
That's right.
We've seen quite a bit of President Ford during the summit meeting in Helsinki, but we haven't seen much of other members of his family who went with him to Finland. So tonight, John Cochran prepared a report for us on the activities of Mrs. Ford and the Ford's son, Jack.
Mrs. Ford began her second day of sightseeing in Helsinki at an open-air museum. She said Finland reminds her of Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. Yesterday, she took a walking tour through the downtown section. Today, she walked among old farmhouses transported from all parts of Finland. And she examined flax, which will be woven into linen. There was also a folk dance in her honor. Earlier on this European trip, Mrs. Ford was exhausted by jet lag. But she has had plenty of energy in Finland, and she says she's glad for this 4-day stop because it gives her time for excursions, including a boat ride to a nearby island. Meanwhile, the Ford's 23-year-old son, Jack, was 90 miles to the north visiting a paper mill. He got the VIP tour, but he also talked with workers who, under the Finnish system, take part in management of the plant. Jack liked this part of the trip better than the diplomatic functions he has attended with his father.
I lead the way ahead.
I don't particularly enjoy the official functions. They're interesting to meet the people and so forth, but they get so involved with protocol and things like that, you don't really get a chance to meet the people of the country, which is something that I personally am trying to do. The worst part of this trip has got to be the 35 speeches over at Finlandi Hall, which, if anyone can stay awake through, I congratulate them.
Jack, an outdoorsman, later went sailing, while his father was sitting through another day of meetings and speeches. John Cochran, NBC News, Helsinki.
And good night for NBC News.